The rich scent of victory filled the private dining room. Elio Ferrero slid the signed contract across the polished table with a triumphant smirk. "The deal is done, Sterling. A pleasure." Julian's face was a mask of unnerving calm. He didn't reach for the papers. Beside him, Sophia watched him, her expression perfectly composed, her hands resting in her lap. The air crackled with tension. Julian leaned forward slightly, his voice a quiet blade in the silence. "Just one small oversight, gentlemen. We haven't yet discussed the full inventory of the warehouses in Livorno." They saw her as an ornament. A beautiful translator hired for the night. They had no idea she was the secret that would bring their entire empire to its knees. To understand how she got here, we have to go back 48 hours. To a single word that changed everything. The air in the staff locker room was thick with the competing scents of industrial dish soap and cheap aerosol deodorant. Under the harsh fluorescent light, Maya, 26, with sharp, intelligent features, leaned against a dented metal locker. Her professional mask wasn't on yet. On her phone, a LinkedIn profile glowed, Maya Alatorre, BA International Business and Marketing, Boston University. Below it, a sea of ignored job applications. She sighed, a ghost of a breath, and clicked the screen off. "Just get through tonight. Mom's medical bill comes out on Friday." She pulled on her black work shoes. They were polished to a mirror shine, save for a single, deep scuff on the left heel, a tiny flaw she couldn't quite erase, a quiet testament to how many miles she'd walked on floors like these. She straightened her apron, took one deep breath, and pushed the door open. The mask slid perfectly into place. Stepping through the doorway, she left the chaos behind and entered a curated world of warmth and wealth. The main dining room was a symphony of hushed conversation, the gentle clink of wine glasses, and the distant sizzle from the kitchen. Golden light from ornate chandeliers bathed the room, making the silverware on the white linen tablecloths glitter. The air smelled of truffle oil and old money. Maya moved through it all with a practiced, invisible grace. She was a ghost in a black apron, refilling water, clearing plates, her smile pleasant but distant. Her section included the private alcove, a semi-secluded area reserved for the restaurant's most important clients. Tonight, it was occupied by Julian Sterling and his 3 associates. The associates were loud. They laughed like thunder, their expensive suits stretched tight across their chests. They talked of acquisitions and stock prices, their voices slicing through the restaurant's calm hum. But Julian Sterling, the man at the center of their orbit, was a black hole of stillness. He didn't speak. He listened, his fingers steepled under his chin, a ridiculously expensive watch peeking from his tailored cuff. His eyes, a cold, clear gray, scanned the room with a detached boredom, missing nothing. He hadn't touched his wine. Maya approached the table. "Deep breath, Maya. Don't mess this up." "Excuse me, gentlemen. Your next course," she said. She placed the plates with flawless efficiency. As she set a dish of risotto before one of the associates, the man gestured wildly to emphasize a point about market share. The back of his hand connected squarely with his full glass of ice water. Time seemed to slow. The glass wobbled, tipped, and began its inevitable fall directly toward Julian Sterling's lap. The associate shouted a curse. But Maya didn't flinch. In a single, fluid motion born of 1,000 near disasters, her left hand shot out and caught the glass midair, water sloshing against the rim. Simultaneously, her right hand, holding a folded service napkin, whipped under the glass, absorbing the few rogue droplets before they could even think of hitting the table. It was over in a second. Not a drop was spilled. It was a small miracle of speed and grace. The associate, embarrassed, just grunted. "Thanks." The other men had already moved on with their conversation. It was a non-event for them. But as Maya straightened up, her heart hammering against her ribs, she saw that one person didn't miss it. Julian Sterling's cold, gray eyes were no longer scanning the room. They were fixed directly on her. The boredom was gone, replaced by a sharp, analytical intensity that felt like a physical touch. It was a gaze that didn't just see a waitress, it saw the mechanics of the save, the precision, the calm under pressure. It saw her. He said nothing. But he held her gaze for a beat too long, the noise of his associates fading into a dull roar. Why is he looking at me like that? Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he gave her a single, deliberate nod. It wasn't a thank you. It was an acknowledgement. A sign that the unseen had just been seen. The energy at the VIP table had shifted. The loud talk of money continued, but Maya felt a new weight in the air. She could feel Julian Sterling's eyes on her as she refilled the other water glasses, a focused gaze that followed her every move. She kept her own eyes downcast, her movements precise, trying to shrink back into the invisibility that had been her shield for so long. Just a ghost, Maya. Get the check, get your tips, and go home. As she placed a basket of fresh bread on the table, a low buzz vibrated against her hip. BRZZZ. BRZZZ. Her entire body went rigid. She never got personal calls during a shift. Ever. With trembling fingers, she subtly pulled the corner of her apron aside to glance at the screen of her cheap phone. The name glowed in harsh white letters, St. Jude's Medical Center. Ice flooded her veins. No. Oh God, no. Not now. Please, not now. She tried to ignore it, to push the phone back into her pocket, but the vibration started again, more insistent this time. Every buzz was a hammer blow against her heart. Her training, her need for this job, every rational thought screamed at her to ignore it. But the image of her mother's pale, tired face flashed in her mind. She had no choice. Making a split-second decision, Maya took 2 steps back from the table, turning toward a heavy velvet curtain on the far wall, creating the thinnest illusion of privacy. She brought the phone to her ear, the single word escaping her lips like a prayer, a reflex born from childhood. Pronto? The Italian was soft, flawless, and heavy with dread. At the table, the effect was instantaneous. The associate's booming story about a hostile takeover died in his throat. Forks and knives froze mid-air. The bubble of noise around the alcove popped, leaving a sudden, ringing silence. 4 pairs of eyes turned toward her. But only one pair mattered. Julian Sterling leaned forward slightly in his chair, the detached boredom completely gone from his face. His gray eyes were now like polished steel, sharp and calculating. The observer had vanished. In his place was a predator that had just identified something rare, something valuable. Maya's back was to them, her world shrinking to the hushed, urgent Italian voice on the phone. Her own responses were clipped, barely audible whispers. Si. Capisco. Va bene. Grazie. She ended the call, her free hand clenched into a white-knuckled fist at her side. For a moment, she just stood there, her shoulders trembling, fighting for a breath that wouldn't come. When she finally turned back to the table, her professional mask was cracked, revealing the raw panic underneath. I apologize for the interruption, she stammered, her voice strained. One of the associates scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. Whatever. Can we get the check? We're done here. But Sterling ignored him completely. His focus was entirely on Maya, his voice low and cutting through the tension. You speak Italian? It was not a question. Yes, sir, Maya said, flustered, her only thought being to de-escalate and escape. Again, my deepest apologies, I'll bring the check right. You speak it like a native, he interrupted, his gaze unwavering, analytical. Maya swallowed hard, the floor seeming to tilt beneath her. I was born in Florence. My mother. She's Italian. Now, about that check. Fascinating, the associate sneered, throwing his napkin on the table. The check, please. He gestured sharply with his chin, a clear dismissal. Relief flooded Maya's face. An escape. She gave a tight, professional nod and turned to leave. As her back was turned, Sterling looked at the man sitting to his right, his own head of security. He didn't take his eyes off Maya's retreating form as he gave the order. His voice was quiet, almost casual, but it carried the chilling, absolute weight of an iron vault door slamming shut. "Marcus! Don't let her leave the building." Maya walked away from the alcove on unsteady legs, her body moving on autopilot. Relief was a weak, fluttering thing in her chest, completely overshadowed by the cold dread from the phone call. Her mind was a chaotic storm of hospital corridors and medical terms, 1,000 miles away from the clinking glasses and rich food of the restaurant. She didn't look back. She didn't see the quiet command Julian Sterling had given. All she wanted was to get to the sanctuary of the kitchen, find a hidden corner, and figure out how she was going to get to her mother. She was just 2 steps from the swinging kitchen doors when a mountain in a suit moved with silent efficiency to block her path. It was Marcus, Sterling's head of security. He was broad, impassive, and as immovable as a stone wall. "Miss Alatorre," he said, his voice a low, polite rumble. Maya flinched, her heart leaping into her throat. "Yes. Mr. Sterling would like a word with you. In his office." It wasn't a request. His office? The words echoed in her mind, laced with panic. "I'm being fired. After everything, I'm being fired for a 2-minute phone call." "Now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Marcus simply nodded and gestured down a short, private hallway she had only ever seen the managers use. The walk felt 100 miles long. She was acutely aware of the other staff members turning to watch, their faces a mixture of curiosity and pity. She was being summoned, and in the rigid hierarchy of the restaurant world, that was never a good thing. The office was small but dominated by power. The walls were paneled with dark, polished wood that seemed to drink the light from the single, elegant desk lamp. The air smelled of old leather and expensive whiskey. Julian Sterling was waiting. He stood behind the massive desk, his suit jacket gone, the sleeves of his crisp white shirt rolled up to his forearms. The relaxed posture was deceptive. He radiated a coiled energy that made the room feel even smaller, sucking the air from her lungs. "Sit, please, Maya," he said, gesturing to the single leather chair in front of the desk. His voice was calm, smooth, and utterly at odds with the frantic beating of her heart. She sat on the very edge of the chair, her back rigid, her hands clenched in her lap to hide their trembling. He didn't speak for a long moment, simply studying her with those unnervingly perceptive gray eyes. "The call you received," he began, his tone without preamble. "Bad news from home, I take it." His directness caught her off guard. My mother is very ill," she managed to say. "The nurse said I should come as soon as I can." To her horror, tears welled in her eyes. She blinked them back furiously, refusing to show weakness in front of this man. Something flickered in his expression, not sympathy, but something closer to understanding. He opened a drawer in his desk and slid a slim black folder across the polished surface toward her. "Open it," he commanded softly. With hesitant fingers, she flipped it open. Inside was a first-class plane ticket to Florence, departing the next afternoon. Tucked beside it was a thick envelope. Peeking inside, she saw more cash than she had ever held in her life. She looked up at him, her mind unable to process what was happening. Confusion, hope, and a deep, gut-level suspicion warred within her. "I don't understand. I require a translator for a 2-week business trip to Italy," he stated simply, as if discussing the weather. "My usual associate has become unavailable. The position requires a native speaker, someone who understands the nuances." He leaned back in his chair, watching her. "The ticket is yours, as is the advance payment, should you accept." It was too perfect. It was a lifeline thrown by a shark. "This has to be a trick. People like him don't help people like me." "Why me?" she asked, her voice stronger than she expected. "There must be 100 professional translators in this city you could hire." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I prefer someone I have personally vetted. And I find I have a sudden appreciation for your grace under pressure." The word vetted sent a chill down her spine. How much did he already know about her? She clutched the folder, her mind racing. It was the answer to her prayers, but it felt like a deal with the devil.
I need to think about it, she said, standing on shaky legs.
Of course, he nodded. The flight leaves at 3 tomorrow afternoon. He paused, letting the silence hang in the air before delivering the final, crushing blow. A car will pick you up at your apartment at noon. Just be ready. The air left her lungs. Her blood ran cold. My apartment. He hadn't asked for her address. He hadn't asked for any details at all. He already knew. The taxi ride back to her small apartment in Queens was a blur. Maya sat clutching the cool leather of the ticket folder, her knuckles white. The city lights smeared past the window, but she saw none of them. Her mind was a frantic loop, replaying the scene in his office, his calm voice echoing in her ears. A car will pick you up at your apartment at noon. The words were a quiet poison, seeping into her, chilling her far more than his offer of money or the impossible plane ticket. It was the casual, effortless way he said it. He hadn't just looked up her employee file. The certainty in his eyes told her he knew more. He knew her world, her tiny corner of it, and he had just inserted himself into the very center of it without permission. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford that night. She paced the worn floor of her living room, the black folder sitting on her small kitchen table like an unexploded bomb. On one hand, it held the key to everything she desperately needed, a way to get to her mother, a final chance to hold her hand and say goodbye. On the other, it felt like a contract, written in invisible ink, selling a part of herself she hadn't yet named. This isn't a job offer, she thought, sinking onto her threadbare sofa. It's a summons. But every time the fear threatened to consume her, the image of her mother's face, fragile and waiting, rose in her mind. And she knew, with a heavy, sinking heart, what she had to do. By dawn, dark circles shadowed her eyes, but her decision was made. She packed a small suitcase, her hands moving on autopilot. Practical clothes, a single black dress, her passport. As the gray morning light filtered through her window, she found herself standing there, watching the quiet street below. That's when she first noticed him. A man in a dark coat stood across the street, leaning against a lamppost, a plume of cigarette smoke curling into the cold air. He wasn't doing anything suspicious, just standing. But he didn't belong. This was a neighborhood of people rushing to work, of mothers walking their children to school. He was an island of stillness in the morning current. A watcher. An hour passed. He was still there. Paranoia, she told herself. You're just on edge. But she couldn't shake the feeling. He was watching her building. Watching for her. At precisely 12 o'clock, a sleek black Escalade, with windows so dark they looked like polished obsidian, purred to a stop at the curb in front of her building. Across the street, the watcher straightened instantly. He dropped his cigarette to the pavement, crushing it under his heel. He raised his hand to his ear, his thumb pressing against something she now realized was a hidden earpiece. Her stomach twisted into a knot of ice. It was real. The watcher and the car were connected. Sterling hadn't just offered her a ride, he'd had her under surveillance all morning, ensuring she didn't run. As if on cue, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Her hands trembled as she read the simple, devastating message. The car is waiting, Ms. Alatorre. She stood frozen at her window, looking from the impassive watcher on the street to the imposing black vehicle idling below. For a fleeting moment, she considered it, hiding, not answering the door, pretending she wasn't home. But the image of her mother's smile, the one from years ago, floated in her mind, and she knew it was a fantasy. She had no choice. She never really did. Taking one last look at the tiny apartment that had been her sanctuary, she grabbed her purse and the handle of her suitcase, the cool plastic feeling like the first link in a chain. The January air bit through Maya's coat as she stepped out of her building, the heavy door clicking shut behind her like the closing of a chapter. The black Escalade was even more imposing up close, its engine a low, silent hum. The driver, A broad-shouldered man with a close-cropped haircut and an impassive expression, took her single suitcase without a word and opened the rear door for her. She slid onto the black leather seat, half expecting to find Julian Sterling waiting inside. Instead, the car was empty, the space feeling vast and unnervingly quiet. The scent of expensive, clean leather filled her nostrils. "Where is Mr. Sterling?" she asked as the driver pulled away from the curb, her voice sounding small in the cavernous interior. "Meeting you at the airport, Ms. Alatorre," the driver replied, his eyes meeting hers for a brief, professional moment in the rearview mirror before focusing back on the road. She nodded and turned to watch her neighborhood slide by through the tinted windows. The man who had been watching from the lamppost was now walking away in the opposite direction, his purpose fulfilled. A chill that had nothing to do with the winter air ran down her spine. This was a coordinated, tactical movement, and she was the cargo. At the airport, she was not taken to the bustling departures terminal. The driver bypassed it entirely, pulling up to a discreet, unmarked building she had never noticed before. He escorted her through a private entrance where there were no lines, no crowds, no security bins for shoes and laptops. It was a seamless, sterile, and utterly foreign experience. This was how power moved through the world, not by waiting in line, but by creating a reality where lines didn't exist. The driver handed her off to a petite woman in a crisp, dark suit who introduced herself as Alessandra, Mr. Sterling's assistant. Her smile was professionally neutral, her eyes assessing. "He's waiting in the private lounge," Alessandra said, her voice cool and efficient as she led Maya through corridors that felt more like a luxury hotel than an airport. "Your luggage will be handled separately." The lounge was another world entirely. Soft lighting, plush, low-slung furniture, a fully stocked bar of top-shelf liquor, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the private jets on the tarmac. And there, standing by those windows with his back to her, was Julian Sterling. He turned as they entered, and once again, she was struck by the sheer presence of the man. Today he wore a charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the light. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jaw freshly shaved. He looked less like a man waiting for a flight and more like a king surveying his domain. "Maya," he said, and her name sounded different in his mouth, sharper, more permanent. "I'm pleased you decided to join me." Decided? The word was a mockery of the choice she never had. She clutched the strap of her purse, her one tangible link to her old life. "I need to see my mother," she said, her voice firm. It was a statement of purpose, a reminder to him, and to herself, of why she was there. Something that might have been respect flickered in his cold, gray eyes. "Direct. I appreciate that." He gestured to a seating area. "Please. We have some time before boarding." Alessandra vanished as silently as she had appeared. Maya found herself alone with him, perched on the edge of a leather sofa while he sat across from her, completely at ease. A moment later, a server approached them with a tray. "Espresso, Mr. Sterling," the server said, placing a small, steaming cup before him. Then, he turned to her. "And a cappuccino for you, miss." Maya froze, her eyes fixed on the cup being placed in front of her. The rich aroma of coffee and cinnamon filled the air. It was exactly what she would have ordered. It's what she ordered every morning at the little cafe near her apartment. She had not told him her coffee preference. She had never told anyone in his world. He knew. She looked up from the cup and met his gaze. He was watching her, a faint, knowing look in his eyes, waiting for the realization to land. And as she looked at the perfectly prepared cappuccino she didn't order, the full weight of his omniscience crashed down on her. This wasn't just a background check. This was a complete and total invasion. How deep does it go? She thought, a cold dread creeping into her heart. What doesn't he know about me? Sophia stared at the cappuccino, the swirl of cinnamon on the foam mocking her. It was such a small thing, a trivial detail, but it was a clear and deliberate message: there is nothing about you I do not know. Before she could voice the question burning on her tongue, Julian continued, his tone smooth and casual. "I also took the liberty of having some clothes sent to the plane for you," he said, watching her over the rim of his espresso cup. Business attire. Appropriate for the meetings we'll be attending. Consider it part of your compensation. It was another assertion of control, disguised as generosity. Your clothes are not good enough. Your identity is not good enough. You will wear what I choose for you. I brought my own clothes, she said, the small act of defiance feeling essential. I'm sure you did, he replied, his tone making it clear what he thought of her wardrobe. He then set his cup down, a gesture that signaled a change in topic. We arrive in Florence tomorrow morning. You'll have the afternoon to visit your grandmother. After that, I'll need you for a dinner meeting. He was giving, but only to reinforce what he could take away. The mention of her grandmother was both a promise and a leash. It settled the storm inside her just enough to focus on the one question that still mattered more than anything. Why me? She asked, her voice low but steady, forcing herself to meet his gaze. Really? Julian didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a slim, unmarked folder, placing it on the coffee table between them. Open it, he said. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. The folder was heavy, cool to the touch. She flipped it open. The first thing she saw was a photograph of herself, smiling, her arm around her grandmother at her college graduation 3 years ago. Sup r equals x slow greater than 1/sup. It was disarming, almost kind. Next to it was a copy of her degree from Boston University in International Business and Marketing. This is my life. He's holding my entire life in a folder. Then came the next pages. A detailed background check, previous addresses, employment history, even her credit score. It was a clinical, sterile dissection of her existence. The final page made her blood run cold. It was a police report she had filed against her ex-boyfriend in Boston, and attached to it were the glossy, black and white photographs of the bruises he had left on her wrists and throat. The air left her lungs. A wave of nausea and violation washed over her. Those bruises. He saw those. How did you get this? She whispered, her voice choked with a mixture of horror and rage. I make it my business to know who works for me, Sophia, he said, his voice soft, almost gentle, which only made it more terrifying. Even those who serve drinks in my restaurant. Sup r equals x slow greater than 7/sup. This is an invasion of my privacy, she said, anger momentarily overriding her fear. Sup r equals x slow greater than 8/sup. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Privacy is a luxury few can truly afford. Sup r equals x slow greater than 9/sup. He took the folder back from her trembling hands and tucked it away. Sup r equals x slow greater than 10/sup. To answer your question. I chose you because you're qualified, you're desperate, and you have no connections that would make you a security risk. Sup r equals x slow greater than 11/sup. His eyes bored into hers, pinning her in place. No parents, both deceased. No siblings. No serious relationship since you fled Boston. Few friends in New York. Sup r equals x slow greater than 12/sup. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping, each word a carefully placed weight designed to crush her. You keep to yourself, work hard, send money to your grandmother's care facility every month, and try to be invisible. Sup r equals x slow greater than 13/sup. A chill traced its way down her spine. His gaze held hers, fierce and possessive. But you were never invisible to me, Sophia. The words hung in the air, thick and heavy. But you were never invisible to me, Sophia. Her mind reeled, trying to grasp the implication. How long had he been watching her? Since she started at the restaurant? Before? Was her entire desperate escape to New York just a prelude to being found by a man like this? Her past, her present, it all felt like a story he had already read, and she was just now turning the pages. Before she could form a response, before she could even breathe, Julian's demeanor shifted. The intense, predatory focus vanished, replaced by a crisp, professional efficiency. He stood abruptly. Our flight is ready, he announced, as if they had just been discussing the weather. Shall we? The sudden change was disorienting, a psychological whiplash that left her no time to argue or even process his revelation. In a daze, she followed him out of the lounge, through another private exit, and directly onto the tarmac. The air was cold, smelling of jet fuel. Waiting before them, its engines humming with a low, powerful thrum, was not a commercial airliner. It was a sleek private jet, stark white against the gray afternoon, its stairs already lowered in invitation sup r equals x slow greater than 1 slash sup dot of course. The first-class ticket he had shown her had been just another piece of theater. Men like Julian Sterling didn't wait in boarding lines or sit among strangers. They moved in a world above the world. The interior of the jet was all cream leather and polished dark wood, with 8 seats that looked more like thrones and a lounge area at the rear. Sup r equals x slow greater than 2 slash sup dot. His assistant, Alessandra, was already seated, her fingers flying across a laptop. Sup r equals x slow greater than 3 slash sup dot. His bodyguard, Marcus, sat near the front, his sheer bulk barely contained by his suit. Sup r equals x slow greater than 4 slash sup dot. This wasn't a trip, it was a mobile command center, and she had just been absorbed into it. Make yourself comfortable, Julian said, gesturing to a seat across from his. It's a long flight. Sophia sank into the buttery leather, the softness of the seat a stark contrast to the hard knot of fear in her stomach. As the jet door sealed with a heavy, final thud, she knew she had crossed the point of no return. She was now truly trapped, 30,000 feet in the air, with a man who had dissected her entire life without her knowledge. Sup r equals x slow greater than 5 slash sup dot. The plane accelerated down the runway, the force pressing her back into the seat. She watched through the small window as the ground fell away, the city shrinking into a map of lights and shadows. She was leaving her entire life behind. Once they reached cruising altitude, a flight attendant appeared, offering champagne on a silver tray. Sophia shook her head, declining. Sup r equals x slow greater than 6 slash sup dot. Julian had already moved to sit with Alessandra, their heads bent over documents, speaking in low tones she couldn't hear. Sup r equals x slow greater than 7 slash sup dot. The personal interrogation was over, she was now just cargo. The flight attendant returned a moment later, this time with several long, black garment bags, which she hung carefully in a hidden closet. Sup r equals x slow greater than 8 slash sup dot. Your additional wardrobe, Miss Russo, the attendant said with a practiced smile. Sup r equals x slow greater than 9 slash sup dot. Sophia looked from the clothes she hadn't chosen to the man who now pointedly ignored her. She turned her head back to the window, staring out at the endless, empty blue sky. It's not a plane, she thought, a wave of cold clarity washing over her. It's a cage. A beautiful, gilded cage. She was no longer a person with a life, but an asset that had been acquired. Her past had been catalogued, her future had been purchased, and she was now being transported to a destination unknown. The low hum of the engines was a constant, hypnotic drone. Sophia tried to read the book she'd brought, but the words swam before her eyes. Julian and his assistant worked tirelessly, their quiet conversation a language of power and influence she couldn't comprehend. After a while, exhaustion from the sleepless night finally won the war against her anxiety, and she drifted into a fitful, dreamless sleep. She awoke to the gentle touch of a hand on her shoulder. For a disoriented moment, she thought she was back in her apartment, the morning sun about to stream through her window. Then her eyes focused on Julian Sterling's face, inches from hers, and the cold reality of her situation crashed back in. We're stopping to refuel, he said, his voice low as he straightened up. We have about an hour. Stretch your legs if you'd like. She blinked, pushing herself upright and looking out the window. Darkness had fallen. A small, private airfield, gleaming under harsh floodlights, stretched out below. There were no commercial terminals, no city lights, just a stark, modern building and the vast, empty night. Where are we? She asked, her voice husky from sleep. Iceland, he replied simply, shrugging into a heavy overcoat. The word was so unexpected, so utterly random, that she could only stare at him. They weren't even following a normal flight path. They were moving through a secret geography, a map known only to men like him. She grabbed her purse and coat, following him down the steps of the plane and into the frigid night air. Her breath plumed in a white cloud in front of her. The cold was a physical shock, sharp and clean and biting. Inside the small terminal, Julian spoke briefly to his bodyguard, then disappeared down a hallway with Alessandra, leaving Sophia momentarily unwatched. The realization hit her like a thunderbolt. This could be it. My chance. I could run, find someone, ask for help. But the thought died as quickly as it came. Run where? She was in Iceland, of all places. Her passport was in her carry-on, still on the plane. She had the cash he'd given her, but no way to book a flight, no way to explain her situation. And most importantly, her grandmother was still waiting for her in Florence. To run now would be to abandon the very reason she'd agreed to this nightmare. Her love for her grandmother was the strongest chain of all. She found the women's restroom and splashed cold water on her face, her reflection looking back at her, pale and wide-eyed. Play along, she told herself. See your grandmother. Then you can figure out a way out. Her resolve strengthened. She found a small, empty cafe area and ordered a hot tea, cradling the warm cup in her frozen hands. She was so absorbed in her thoughts, watching the plane being refueled under the bright lights, that she didn't notice Julian approach until he slid into the seat across from her. Feeling better? He asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice. He watched her face carefully for a moment before he spoke again. Your grandmother's condition has stabilized slightly, he said, his tone matter-of-fact. I had my people check in with her facility. The doctor believes she'll hold on until we arrive. Sophia nearly dropped her cup. The intrusion was staggering, another violation. Yet the news itself was a balm to her frayed soul. You checked on her? Why? He took a sip of his own espresso, his gray eyes unreadable in the dim light. It would be unfortunate if we arrived too late, he said simply. I dislike wasted journeys. The callousness of his reason should have angered her, but it didn't. Instead, an odd, overwhelming wave of relief washed over her. Whatever his selfish motives, he had just given her the most precious gift in the world, more time. A guarantee that this entire terrifying ordeal would not be in vain. Thank you, she said quietly, the words feeling small and inadequate. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture that managed to acknowledge her gratitude while making it clear he required none of it. For the first time, she felt something other than fear toward him. It was a deeply confusing, unwelcome flicker of gratitude, and it terrified her more than any threat. The rest of the flight passed in a blur of fitful sleep and anxious wakefulness. Sophia didn't speak, and neither did Julian. She was a storm of conflicting emotions, resentment at his methods, a terrifying gratitude for the results, and a deep, gnawing fear of the man himself. Dawn was breaking as they began their descent into Florence. Golden light spilled across the familiar landscape, illuminating the terracotta rooftops and the winding, silver ribbon of the Arno River. Despite everything, her heart lifted at the sight of her homeland. It was a beauty that was part of her soul. But the feeling was bittersweet. She was returning not as a daughter, but as a possession. As the plane touched down, Julian moved to sit across from her, his expression all business. We'll be staying at my villa in the hills, he said, straightening his cuffs. A car will take you to see your grandmother this afternoon. It will bring you back in time for our dinner meeting at 8. The words were precise, deliberate. A car will take you. Not I will take you. She was a package to be transported on his schedule. I understand, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. On the tarmac, 2 black SUVs waited. As they disembarked, stepping from the controlled environment of the jet into the cool Tuscan morning, Julian placed a hand on the small of her back, guiding her down the stairs. It was the first time he had touched her. The gesture was light, proper, yet it burned like a brand through her coat. It was a simple, proprietary act, a statement of ownership for an audience of no one. Welcome to Florence, Sophia, he murmured, his voice close to her ear. Or should I say, welcome home. The drive took them out of the city and into the rolling hills. Vineyards and olive groves stretched on either side of the winding road, a landscape so achingly familiar it hurt. She watched the landmarks of her youth slide by, the small cafe where her grandmother used to buy her gelato, the stone church where her parents were married, each one a memory of a life of freedom that no longer felt like her own. She sat in silence beside Julian, acutely aware of his proximity, of the faint, expensive scent of his cologne filling the small space. When they arrived, the villa stole what little breath she had left. It wasn't a house, it was a small estate, a sprawling structure of honey-colored stone and terracotta tiles, surrounded by manicured gardens and ancient olive trees. Staff appeared as the car stopped, opening doors and taking their luggage with quiet deference. Julian spoke to them in rapid, flawless Italian, his voice carrying the easy cadence of command. He gave instructions about her room, about dinner preparations, about security protocols. He turned to her, his duty done. "Maria will show you to your room. Rest. The car will be ready at 2. And with that, he disappeared inside, leaving her with an older woman whose kind, weathered face was at odds with the opulence surrounding them. "Come, Signorina," Maria said gently in Italian, gesturing for her to follow. The inside of the villa was just as breathtaking, with soaring ceilings, antique furniture, and artwork that belonged in a museum. Maria led her up a grand staircase and down a long corridor to a set of double doors. The room was larger than her entire New York apartment. A massive 4-poster bed was draped in creamy linens, a sitting area was arranged before a stone fireplace, and floor-to-ceiling windows opened onto a private balcony overlooking the Tuscan countryside. Her suitcase had already been delivered and placed on a luggage rack. But what caught her eye were the dozen black garment bags hanging in the open, walk-in closet. On the center of the perfectly made bed lay a small, black velvet box. Beside it was a simple, cream-colored note card. With trembling fingers, she opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of black silk, was a delicate gold necklace with a single, perfect pearl. She picked up the card. The handwriting was sharp, angular, and unapologetically masculine. It read, "For tonight's dinner. J." She sank onto the edge of the bed, the cold weight of the necklace in her palm. The invisible chains were tightening. Every luxury, every kindness, every beautiful thing he gave her was just another link, pulling her deeper into his world, a world where she was now a guest in her own homeland. Sophia slept fitfully for a few hours, the sheer emotional exhaustion finally pulling her under. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the tall windows, casting golden patterns on the plush carpet. She showered in the marble bathroom, where her own, modest toiletries looked out of place next to the expensive, scented oils the villa provided. In the closet, she found that her clothes had been unpacked, laundered, and pressed, hanging neatly beside the new wardrobe Julian had provided. Deliberately, she chose her own faded jeans and a soft, worn sweater. It was a small act of defiance, a way to feel like herself in a place where she was being systematically remade into someone else. "It's the only thing that's mine here." At precisely 2 o'clock, she descended the grand staircase to find the driver waiting. As they drove through the winding hills and into the outskirts of Florence, she watched the familiar landscape roll by, each landmark a painful, beautiful memory. When they pulled up to the hospice, a modern building set in quiet gardens, the driver opened her door and handed her a large bouquet of white lilies. "Mr. Sterling thought you might want to bring these," he said simply. Another calculated gesture. Another move she couldn't refuse. She took the flowers, their sweet, heavy scent filling her nostrils as she walked through the automatic doors, her heart pounding. At the reception desk, the nurse's eyes widened slightly when Sophia gave her grandmother's name. "Ah, Miss Russo." "Yes, we've been expecting you," the nurse said warmly. "She's having a good day today." The nurse then leaned closer, lowering her voice. "The new medication Mr. Sterling arranged has made her much more comfortable." Sophia froze, the flowers trembling in her hand. "I'm sorry." "What?" The nurse looked confused by her reaction. "The medication. The specialist from Switzerland arrived this morning." "Didn't you know?" "A specialist? From Switzerland?" Sophia's mind couldn't comprehend the scale of it. While she had been sleeping on his private jet, Julian had been flying a world-class doctor across Europe. The nurse led her down a quiet corridor to a private room, another of Julian's arrangements, she assumed. The woman in the bed was a fragile echo of the vibrant grandmother of her childhood, but when she turned her head and saw Sophia, her eyes, the same hazel as hers, lit up with pure, undiluted joy. "Sophia, mia cara," she whispered, her voice weak but clear. Sophia rushed to the bedside, setting the lilies aside to take her grandmother's frail, paper-thin hands in hers. "Nonna," she breathed, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I'm here." For the next hour, she sat and listened, holding her grandmother's hand as she drifted between the past and the present. During a moment of perfect clarity, her grandmother studied her face. "And this man who brought you home?" she asked, her gaze surprisingly sharp. "Who is he to you?" The lie came easily, tasting like ash in her mouth. "He's my employer, Nonna. Just my employer." Her grandmother's hand squeezed hers with surprising strength. "Be careful, Sophia. Men like that. They take what they want." Later, after her grandmother had drifted off to sleep, Sophia found the Swiss doctor at the nurse's station. He was a kind-eyed man who looked exhausted. "How long does she have?" Sophia asked bluntly. The doctor hesitated. "With this new treatment? Perhaps a week. Maybe 2. We can keep her comfortable, lucid. It is the best we can do." He gave her a small, tired smile. Mr. Sterling was very persuasive. "And very generous. I will be staying in Florence for the time being to monitor her condition personally." She walked out of the hospice and back to the waiting car as the sun began to set, painting the Tuscan sky in shades of pink and gold. Her emotions were a tangled, chaotic mess. She felt a wave of profound, soul-deep gratitude to Julian for this impossible gift, the gift of a comfortable, lucid goodbye. But that gratitude was terrifying. It was a debt. He hadn't just purchased her time, he had purchased her grandmother a piece of her life. How can you ever be free from a man who can buy miracles? Sophia slept fitfully for a few hours, the sheer emotional exhaustion finally pulling her under. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the tall windows, casting golden patterns on the plush carpet. She showered in the marble bathroom, where her own, modest toiletries looked out of place next to the expensive, scented oils the villa provided. In the closet, she found that her clothes had been unpacked, laundered, and pressed, hanging neatly beside the new wardrobe Julian had provided. Deliberately, she chose her own faded jeans and a soft, worn sweater. It was a small act of defiance, a way to feel like herself in a place where she was being systematically remade into someone else. "It's the only thing that's mine here." At precisely 2 o'clock, she descended the grand staircase to find the driver waiting. As they drove through the winding hills and into the outskirts of Florence, she watched the familiar landscape roll by, each landmark a painful, beautiful memory. When they pulled up to the hospice, a modern building set in quiet gardens, the driver opened her door and handed her a large bouquet of white lilies. "Mr. Sterling thought you might want to bring these," he said simply. Another calculated gesture. Another move she couldn't refuse. She took the flowers, their sweet, heavy scent filling her nostrils as she walked through the automatic doors, her heart pounding. At the reception desk, the nurse's eyes widened slightly when Sophia gave her grandmother's name. "Ah, Miss Russo." "Yes, we've been expecting you," the nurse said warmly. "She's having a good day today." The nurse then leaned closer, lowering her voice. "The new medication Mr. Sterling arranged has made her much more comfortable." Sophia froze, the flowers trembling in her hand. "I'm sorry." "What?" The nurse looked confused by her reaction. "The medication. The specialist from Switzerland arrived this morning. Didn't you know?" "A specialist? From Switzerland?" Sophia's mind couldn't comprehend the scale of it. While she had been sleeping on his private jet, Julian had been flying a world-class doctor across Europe. The nurse led her down a quiet corridor to a private room, another of Julian's arrangements, she assumed. The woman in the bed was a fragile echo of the vibrant grandmother of her childhood, but when she turned her head and saw Sophia, her eyes, the same hazel as hers, lit up with pure, undiluted joy. "Sophia, mia cara," she whispered, her voice weak but clear. Sophia rushed to the bedside, setting the lilies aside to take her grandmother's frail, paper-thin hands in hers. "Nonna," she breathed, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I'm here." For the next hour, she sat and listened, holding her grandmother's hand as she drifted between the past and the present. During a moment of perfect clarity, her grandmother studied her face. "And this man who brought you home?" she asked, her gaze surprisingly sharp. "Who is he to you?" The lie came easily, tasting like ash in her mouth. "He's my employer, Nonna. Just my employer." Her grandmother's hand squeezed hers with surprising strength. "Be careful, Sophia. Men like that. They take what they want." Later, after her grandmother had drifted off to sleep, Sophia found the Swiss doctor at the nurse's station. He was a kind-eyed man who looked exhausted. "How long does she have?" Sophia asked bluntly. The doctor hesitated. "With this new treatment? Perhaps a week. Maybe 2. We can keep her comfortable, lucid. It is the best we can do." He gave her a small, tired smile. Mr. Sterling was very persuasive. And very generous. "I will be staying in Florence for the time being to monitor her condition personally." She walked out of the hospice and back to the waiting car as the sun began to set, painting the Tuscan sky in shades of pink and gold. Her emotions were a tangled, chaotic mess. She felt a wave of profound, soul-deep gratitude to Julian for this impossible gift, the gift of a comfortable, lucid goodbye. But that gratitude was terrifying. It was a debt. He hadn't just purchased her time, he had purchased her grandmother a piece of her life. How can you ever be free from a man who can buy miracles? When Sophia arrived back at the villa, Maria was waiting in the grand foyer. The sun had set, and the house was cast in the warm, golden glow of intricate lamps. "Mr. Sterling asked me to help you prepare for dinner, Signorina," the housekeeper said, her kind eyes full of an unspoken understanding. "The guests will be arriving at 8. Sophia checked her watch. Barely an hour. She followed Maria upstairs to her suite, where a hot bath, scented with jasmine and rose petals, had already been drawn in the marble tub. Laid out on the bed was one of the garment bags, unzipped to reveal a stunning midnight blue cocktail dress with a modest neckline but a daringly low back. Beside it were matching heels, a small clutch, and the pearl necklace Julian had left for her. "Mr. Sterling was very specific about the ensemble," Maria said softly, noting Sophia's expression. "He has an eye for these things." An eye, and an unnerving knowledge of my exact measurements, Sophia thought. She thanked Maria, assuring her she could manage on her own. Once the door closed, she sank into the hot, fragrant water, letting it soothe her tense muscles. Her thoughts were a jumble of her grandmother's frail hand, the Swiss doctor's kind eyes, and Julian's cold, calculating face. She owed him. For the gift of time, for the miracle of a comfortable goodbye, she owed him. And a terrifying, pragmatic thought rose through the chaos: the only way to survive this was to play the part. She would be his perfect translator, wear his beautiful clothes, and attend his important dinners. But she would do it with her eyes wide open. She would watch, she would listen, and she would learn exactly who Julian Sterling was. The decision made, a strange calm settled over her. She emerged from the bath and began to prepare. The dress fit perfectly, the deep blue silk skimming her curves as if it had been made for her body. It probably had been. She dried and styled her hair into loose waves, applied makeup with a careful, steady hand, and finally, clasped the cool, heavy weight of the pearl necklace around her throat. The woman who stared back from the mirror was a stranger. Polished, elegant, untouchable. She was the perfect accessory for a powerful man. She was wearing armor. A sharp knock sounded at her door. Expecting Maria, she called out, "Come in." The door opened to reveal Julian himself. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, a crisp white shirt, and a midnight blue tie that was an exact match to her dress. He stood in the doorway for a moment, one hand in his pocket, his dark eyes sweeping over her with an intense, proprietary approval that made her skin flush. "Perfect," he said simply. She stood, smoothing down the fabric of the dress. "Thank you for all of this. And for the specialist. For my grandmother. That was." She trailed off, unable to find the right word. "How is she?" he asked, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him, shrinking the space between them. "Comfortable. Better than I expected." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "The dinner tonight is important," he said, "all business now. 4 businessmen from Florence. Old money, old connections. They prefer to speak Italian, even though they're all fluent in English. It makes them feel they have an advantage." "And you're letting them think they do," she guessed. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Precisely. You will translate everything for me, accurately. But with one exception." He moved closer, his cologne enveloping her, subtle and masculine. His presence was overwhelming. "If they say anything particularly revealing, something unguarded that they assume I won't understand, you'll give me a signal." He reached out, his fingers brushing the skin of her collarbone, just beside the pearl. The touch was brief, almost accidental, but it sent an electric jolt through her. "Touch your pearl," he murmured, his eyes locked on hers. "Then I'll know to pay special attention." She could only nod, her throat suddenly tight. He had just made her his co-conspirator. The necklace wasn't just a gift, or a piece of armor. It was now a tool, binding them together in a silent, secret alliance. "The guests are arriving," Julian said, glancing at his watch. "Shall we?" He offered her his arm. After a fractional hesitation, she placed her hand on his forearm. It was solid muscle beneath the expensive fabric of his suit. They descended the grand staircase together, a united front. Sophia could feel the eyes of the staff on them, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and speculation. In the drawing room, a fire crackled in the hearth, and the scent of expensive cigars already hung in the air. 3 men in tailored suits turned as they entered. They were older, with the easy confidence of men who had inherited their power generations ago. "Gentlemen," Julian said, his hand resting proprietarily on the small of her back. "Allow me to introduce my associate, Sophia Russo." The men's eyes assessed her with varying degrees of subtlety, their gazes lingering a moment too long. The conversation shifted immediately to rapid, colloquial Italian, a clear and deliberate test. "You didn't tell us you'd found such a beautiful new assistant, Sterling," one of the men, Antonio, said with a charming but dismissive smile. "Where have you been hiding her?" "They think I'm just an ornament," she thought. "Let's see about that." Before Julian could reply, Sophia answered for herself, her voice smooth, her Tuscan accent flawless. "It's a pleasure to meet you, signor. I was born in Florence. I only recently returned." The men exchanged surprised glances. The air in the room shifted. She wasn't just a pretty face he'd brought along, she was one of them. She had passed the first, small test. Before they could ask more, the final guest was announced, Elio Ferrero. He was younger than the others, perhaps 40, and carried himself with the predatory grace of a panther. His eyes found Sophia immediately, his smile sharp and appraising. Dinner was a masterclass in power dynamics. Sophia was seated at Julian's right hand, with Ferrero directly across from her. Wine was poured, appetizers served, and the conversation flowed around her. She translated discreetly when needed, leaning close to Julian's ear, acutely aware of his warmth, of the subtle scent of his cologne, of the way his focus sharpened whenever she spoke. By the main course, the wine had loosened tongues, and the conversation turned to the true purpose of the meeting, a shipping company Julian wanted to acquire, a company in which all 4 men held an interest. "The price you're offering is insultingly low," one of the men said bluntly in Italian. Leaning close to Julian's ear, Sophia translated. "The company is hemorrhaging money," Julian replied calmly in English. "I'm doing you a favor by taking it off your hands." She relayed his words in perfect, formal Italian. The negotiation grew more heated, more technical. Sophia translated faithfully, impressed despite herself at Julian's command of the details, at his ruthless but fair tactics. He was a shark, but a brilliant one. Then, as dessert was being served, the moment came. Elio Ferrero, believing the negotiations were settled, leaned toward his companions. He lowered his voice, speaking in a rapid, almost conspiratorial Italian, absolutely certain the American across the table wouldn't understand a word. "Let him have the company," Ferrero murmured, a sly grin on his face. "The real value isn't in the shipping lanes. It's in the contents of the warehouses in Livorno. He doesn't know about those yet." Sophia's blood went cold. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This is it. This is the signal. Her hand, which had been resting in her lap, felt impossibly heavy. Slowly, with what she prayed was a natural, casual movement, she lifted it. Her fingers, cool and trembling slightly, brushed against the single pearl at her throat. The gesture lasted only a second. Across the table, Julian's eyes flickered down to her hand for a fraction of an instant, then back up to Ferrero's smiling face. His expression never changed. He didn't react, didn't even blink. But a new, dangerous stillness settled over him. He had received the signal. "Gentlemen," Julian said smoothly in English, raising his glass as if nothing had happened. "I believe we are making progress. Allow me to propose a revised offer. This story is a powerful reminder that true worth isn't always found in the loudest voice or the most impressive title. Often, it's hidden in quiet competence and grace under pressure. It's in those small, almost invisible moments, like catching a falling glass before anyone else even realizes it's tipping. It shows us that in a world full of noise and pretense, authentic value is often silent, and the person who can calmly handle chaos is the most powerful one in the room. That's why we want to hear from you. Have you ever felt underestimated, only to prove everyone wrong with a hidden talent or your quiet strength? Share your story in the comments below. We truly believe everyone has a catching the glass moment, and we'd be honored and inspired to read yours. Thank you so much for watching. Never forget the incredible value you bring to the world, especially in the moments when you feel invisible. You never know who is truly seeing you. Take care,